Alright, what's up, Nagamo fans? Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. Advertised to be Kiryu's last game in the series, Yakuza 6 takes the Dragon of Dojima through one big, long, and epic rehash in order to conclude his story once and for all. Well, until he shows up in Yakuza 7, and Gaiden, and now Infinite Wealth, my point being that this was in fact not Kiryu's last game, so there's 1 point for false advertisement. But even if it was, I have held the opinion for a long time that Yakuza 6 might actually be the worst game in the mainline series, which I still do, it's the title of the video. But to summarize my feelings overall, Yakuza 6 sucks and 5 is better, lol. Obvious joke aside, being the worst in the series doesn't mean it's automatically just a bad game overall. There's a lot to like about Yakuza 6, and honestly, the writing for some of the characters is Yakuza at its best. I remember being tremendously excited about this game when waiting for it to come out in 2018. My friends and I would literally replicate the new heat moves and dynamic intros and shit. I played the absolute hell out of the demo, and since all your XP would transfer over to the main game, I was completely overpowered for my first playthrough. And overall, I remember the game being fine. You know, it wasn't until successive playthroughs, playing every other Yakuza game, and stewing on 6 for a couple of years, that I realized I don't really like this game more than any of the other titles in the series. In fact, there's a lot about Yakuza 6 that offends me in terms of character writing and lack thereof, but we will get to everything in due time. I just recently replayed 6, and while I don't hold a lot of hate for it, I still think there's a lot I need to criticize this game about, since Dragon Engine titles have come so far since its release, and since Infinite Wealth is just around the corner. How I'm gonna format this video is by splitting each major point and my criticisms into general sections, since that will help me write my script as I am suffering from writer's block, and to help you find a specific point to agree with or argue against. I don't know, just please watch, like, and subscribe, thanks. So this was the first game to introduce the Dragon Engine in all its glory. I remember RGG advertising it while leading up to the release of the game, with Kiryu sporting this casual outfit and blue jacket in the original demo that never shows up in the main game. Like seriously, does anyone know what happened to this? Anyway, upgrading to the Dragon Engine was supposed to be Yakuza's big step into next-gen gaming. It allows for improved graphics and modern mechanics such as walking around in first person, taking photos with your phone, and dynamically exploring nooks, crannies, rooftops, etc. When I first played the game, I remember being blown away at all these new and realistic features. But when the novelty wears off, you start to realize that it doesn't add anything of real substance to the game in terms of meaningful interaction. The best thing about this new dynamic traversal has to be the ability to enter and exit building interiors without a loading screen. You could even interact with the vending machines to buy a drink with a power-up, which everybody liked, but it only ever carried over to Kiwami 2 before being dropped for some reason. Every game since 6 has also made subtle improvements to the Dragon Engine, especially in terms of graphics and visuals. But as for Yakuza 6, it had the disadvantage of being the first game to use the new engine, which led to unpolished goofiness such as items exploding on collision with Kiryu, enemy ragdolls, and overall inconsistency. I've read that RGG had a rush development for 6 due to budget and time concerns, but I'm no expert in those details. I will say I do feel for them though, because again, this was the first Dragon Engine game, which means everything that is brand new was built from the ground up. When I say this game is inconsistent though, I mean it. You'll have some of the most beautiful shots and cutscenes in this series, immediately followed up by some ugly and stupid looking shit. For example, the in-game cutscenes compared to the pre-rendered ones are night and day. The worst offenders of which being the sub-stories. The characters stand around lifelessly, the animations are slow and choppy, and I don't think Kiryu even blinks most of the time. I do like how this game started the trend of voicing all the sub-stories though, but all the other charm for them went right out the window. Take Yakuza 0 for example. Kiryu would react through facial expressions, the camera shots would support the dialogue, the characters would emote in a way that fits the pacing, and skipping through dialogue wasn't jarring at all compared to Yakuza 6 where it just chops through the scene awkwardly. The amount of detail on character models also tends to vary. Sometimes Kiryu looks absolutely great, other times there's just something off about his face or animation or something. Take his Hiroshima outfit for example. It looks amazing, one of his best fits honestly. But in Kamurocho, when he has his jacket on, it just looks off. You know, it's got flat textures and lack of details on the seams, his arms look too thin. I don't know, I just don't like how it looks in this game. And overall, character models are very inconsistent with how much detail they bothered to put into their faces. Like, look at this shot of Kiryu and Akiyama together, for example. Kiryu looks hyper-realistic, you can see the pores on his face, whereas Akiyama's facial hair looks like it was drawn on by a black marker. It's very jarring at times. There's also a weird mixture of dynamic intros being rendered cutscenes versus an in-game one. Speaking of dynamic intros, the first one with Nagamo honestly sold the game for me back in 2018. Everyone loves dynamic intros to boss fights, it's the hypest shit ever that makes Yakuza really stand out as a fighting game, so imagine my disappointment when I realized this first one here was also the best one in the entire game. The Dragon Engine allows for a wide variety of unique dynamic intros that Yakuza 6 sadly didn't realize, and that future games like Judgment would completely outdo. Now I will admit to sort of being a Dragon Engine hater when I was younger, but since Yakuza 6, the series has really grown into this ambitious engine and found a permanent footing that could only improve on itself. I mentioned earlier that you can take photos with your phone in-game, which has become a Dragon Engine staple ever since. But there's a secret mechanic to Yakuza 6 where you can find ghosts, quote-unquote, if you stand in certain spots around Kamurocho and aim your camera in a certain direction. When we were younger, I remember this being the coolest shit ever, but having just replayed the game, I understand why they never brought this feature back. Like, a lot of these ghost sightings are just silly. We used to always make fun of this Nishiki one, since you can tell it's literally just his PNG edited into the frame with him striking a cross pose. Like, it's his character model, right? Some of these are pretty cool though, like finding Dojima or Ihara's dead faces, like a silent jump scare, kinda creepy. And then you get some very dumb ones like, why the hell can you find Ishin characters? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, with all that being said, this is by far the worst Dragon Engine game, which is why it's no surprise it left a very bad first impression on most fans. People to this day still debate if Yakuza should have ever made the switch, and I honestly think it's this game's fault. Because of the memes and backlash this game spawned about the engine, it left a permanent stigma against it, despite the fact it has improved so significantly since then, that it is now objectively better than the previous engines used. You could even say that the new engine is like a dragon. Oh boy, buckle in. This part is going to be all about the stuff that is mysteriously missing or unnecessarily removed. And don't fret, Yakuza 6 is missing a lot of shit. We'll go over it in a list here, even though I'm sure these are points that have been called out by everybody else 1,000 times. Firstly, there was a purge of so many minigames. Pool is gone, gambling is gone, bowling is gone, and even the claw machines are gone. All staples of Yakuza side content have been removed without a replacement in most cases. I don't think bowling has made a comeback since this game, and even though most people dislike the gambling minigames, I think Koi Koi is goated and deserves more appreciation by the fanbase. Claw machines have come back in future games, but the physics are so much worse compared to the older titles, thanks Dragon Engine. Darts have been completely reworked to an aim and time thing, which is weird for an engine going for a more realistic style, to change a more charming and realistic minigame feature into a more generic win or lose QTE essentially. Dragon Engine darts get so boring so quickly because of it. The Hostess minigame has been reworked to this bland-ass text choice thing as well, and there's only one club in Kamurocho, so when you're spending time in Hiroshima, which is more than half the game, it will be unavailable to you. Kamurocho is also missing like half the map. You can't go to the North Hotel District or the Champion District, which have been available in every other game. They gave a little in-universe explanation for it that those areas are under construction, but I mean, come on. We're also missing the underground areas, most of the rooftops, and even Purgatory. I get that Hiroshima is the main area for Yakuza 6's narrative, thus Kamurocho is backseated, but Hiroshima is not a big map by any means. It's beautiful, sure, it has unique minigames too, but still, we went from having 5 unique maps in Yakuza 5 to the equivalent of 1 if you add up the sizes of Kamurocho and Onomichi in this game. There are no lockers to open, so thus no locker keys to find. Instead, you have a few safes scattered around where you can find their key or code nearby, which always yields some low-value item or shitty gear, so there's no point in even doing them. The other collectibles you can get serve legitimately no purpose other than being hints to the aforementioned ghost sightings. Speaking of gear, you only get 2 general slots to equip crap on. Most of the gear in this game is useless because of this limitation, and there's also no way to keep weapons in your inventory. You can't buy any, you can't upgrade gear either, no Kamiyama works, which also means that character is completely absent. All weapons that you can pick up off the ground will always have 3 hits maximum, as in you can swing it 3 times only, which I guess does balance out how powerful they are in this game, but it's still repetitive to swing maybe twice and do the heat action or not. Heat actions themselves are very limited and similar. Most objects use the same animations. I've grown very sick of this bicycle one over the years. This is also the only Yakuza game ever to not have a heat move for enemies lying on the ground. Like, how do you not even reuse an old one until Kiwami 2? Since you can't go to Purgatory, there's no Coliseum mode. Again, I think this is the only Yakuza game missing one. The Florist, who has been a staple character in every previous game, is inexplicably missing. Neither Kiryu nor Date even mention him, which is especially egregious seeing as how this was Kiryu's quote-unquote last game, and that the Florist could have played a big role in providing vital information about Haruka's hit and run. There's no Kiwami Bob or fun packs, there are no revelations in this game either, so Mac is also absent and unmentioned. If you couldn't tell by now, there are way too many staple side characters missing for a game meant to send Kiryu off forever. Included in that list is Komaki, as there are no training sequences in Yakuza 6 either. This one is extremely fucking stupid, seeing how Sadachi and Saigo are in the game, so we can have Saejima and Akiyama's trainers have a couple of funny moments as cameos, but not the man directly responsible for some of Kiryu's most iconic moves. At least he's gonna be in Infinite Wealth, but I mean, goddamn. Some random Yakuza 0 characters make a return though, such as the cult leader from that one funny sub-story, and Pocket Circuit Fighter. Now, don't get me wrong, seeing these dudes again is great, but it's clearly Yakuza 0 fan service since RGG knew that that was their most popular game at the time, and Fighter sub-story is probably my favorite though, despite the fact that you can't actually race. Poor dude is aging like milk. Kazuki is missing once again, but Yuya makes an appearance during a main mission, which is great. Probably my favorite recurring side character. He and Kiryu are straight up bros without any commitment to each other. This also happens to be the only mainline Yakuza game without a Majima boss fight, except for Zero obviously because he's a playable character. So there's another streak to throw down the trash bin. And now for a big one. Shinada is completely gone without closure to his story. Like, yeah, we know how it concluded, and yes, there's not much relevance between him and Kiryu, but come on, at least mention how the guy went back home or something. There is a whole ass baseball minigame here, and it was such a missed opportunity to not have Shinada show up as a recruitable or something. Tanamura is treated even worse without so much as an acknowledgement still. Even though Little Asia burns down in this game, he isn't even brought up. Like, come on RGG, he has a new actor now, don't just ignore entire main characters like that. This can be said honestly about every other main character that is in the game too, being completely put on the back burner, but we'll get into that more later. Other than Shinada, every single other Yakuza 5 character is missing from this game's story. This game honestly wipes its ass with Yakuza 5 despite using a direct cutscene from it in the beginning. They even show Aizawa but don't explain where he went. Like, do you know how rare it is that a final boss survives a Yakuza game? I'm pretty sure RGG Online explained it, that he got arrested of course, but still, you don't even see the Omi Alliance in this game, or Watase. We had to wait until Yakuza 7 to find out he became chairman, so there's that. And Yakuza 6 also stopped the streak of using intros when you open the game, which every other Yakuza game had as kind of an anime opening. At least Judgment picked it back up with an opening that played early on during the story, and now the new Like a Dragon games are doing this too. But these were just the biggest things I could think of. I'm sure there's even more shit in this game that was missing that I can't remember right now. But for the sake of moving on, I'll just play it safe and say etc. So this part is very self-explanatory. The combat in this game is far from stellar. I'd honestly put it at Yakuza 3's level of unenjoyable combat, because hey, if you hay out every single enemy blocks your attacks mid-combo in that game, the same problem is still prevalent here. Using normal attacks becomes unviable against large groups, since it's almost guaranteed that one enemy will block and just interrupt your entire string, and one is all it takes for your attacks to bounce off their guard and completely interrupt Kiryu, leaving you open to get mauled by the mob. Everyone knows that the guard bounce shit is the worst thing ever, but even without it, you're always better off just doing drop kicks over and over or swinging the nearest bike around to gain full heat instantly and using extreme heat mode to clean up the scraps. Now let me back up a little and explain. So for my recent replay, I chose Legendary difficulty as I wanted to experience somewhat of a challenge. I remembered Yakuza 6 already being stupid easy, so I figured anything below Legend would be nerfing it just too much. Now, there was no problem there, the difficulty isn't the issue. The issues are baked into the game's new flow of combat in Kiryu's one fighting style. So we downgraded from 4 unique fighting styles for Kiryu into a mashup of 1. Not to sound like a spoiled brat, but I don't think beat-em-up fighting games like Yakuza can make do with one fighting style anymore, as the lack of variety makes the combat get bland very easily. That's why Yakuza 4 and 5 had multiple protagonists with their own unique stances. And yes, while they have improved on this Dragon Engine style for Kiryu over time, this was the first instance of seeing it though, at its bare bones. It was also a very bold move by RGG to completely change Kiryu's iconic fighting style in his supposed last game, and not even offer the ability to switch to the old Dragon style or any previous styles. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I remember it being an odd choice, especially since this new style doesn't do anything new really. It just incorporates a bunch of older ideas into one all-purpose fighting style, down to extreme heat mode basically being Kiryu's rage ability from Yakuza 5, but on crack. Now, extreme heat is a fine mechanic. It just allows you to expunge heat and enemies much quicker while allowing access to different heat moves and abilities. This includes the best heat action in the entire game, this absolute beatdown by mashing square and then succeeding the QTEs. While I have the spotlight on this, I should point out how broken it is. You just have it right away, it comes free with your Kiryu, and if you pull it off by, again, simply mashing square in extreme heat and then doing the QTEs that follow in the same clockwise pattern on your buttons every single time, you will shred health bars away, including over like 40% of most bosses' health. I love it if I want to skip a fight basically, but still, it's broken. There is a complete garbage upgrade to add more square attacks to your extreme heat, which would require you to attack 8 times to pull this heat move off instead of 4, which you should never buy, because that does nothing but disadvantage you. I mean, it's borderline a game design failure for the player to have to avoid a specific upgrade because it's worse for you to have it. Outside of the OP heat moves, using heat actions feels very unimpactful in this game. Like I said, you're better off just drop kicking or using Le Big Weapon to clear groups out. Using normal rush combos followed up by finishers will end up feeling very weak, slow, and interruptible before you even reach the halfway point of the game. And that's regardless of your upgrades, charged attacks, or directional combos. If you hold directly back from Kiryu when you do your finishers, it will cause him to do a different move, but you probably won't use this mechanic for 95% of the game, since you have to go out of your way to do it at the risk of getting hit or blocked in exchange for weaker damage. When you're using extreme heat though, you will likely do the finisher moves where you mash triangle to get the most damage input possible, which I like doing but does get stale over time. There are also unique stagger heat actions like this where the enemy has to be in a specific stance and you have to be in extreme heat mode to pull it off. I do actually like these too because they change depending if you're behind the enemy or in front of them. My favorite being this axe kick when they're kneeling down. It's just beautiful. But again, I do see why they didn't bring this back, because it requires very specific circumstances and does get stale pulling these off. At some point, you'll just say screw this garbage and start drop kicking for days. Talking about bosses though, this game has the worst boss fights in the series by far. Every single boss has one red health bar, which has only ever been an issue in this game. In every single other Yakuza game, bosses would have multiple health bars indicated by colors to show how durable they were going to be. Outside of just a gameplay perspective, this would show how powerful the character was and add that extra element of hype going into the fight. For example, seeing a purple health bar for the first time when you get to Shibusawa in Yakuza 0, or Aizawa having like 10 of them in his fight, this was a unique way to show you that these characters were serious, and when every single boss in Yakuza 6 has the same health bar, it takes away a lot of charm and individuality from the boss fight itself. That's without even mentioning how every boss has the same heat color. More on that in a moment. I must say though that having one health bar doesn't mean every boss just has the same amount of health. Obviously the fights later on in the game take longer to deplete the health bar than those in the first chapters. But still, there's nothing to indicate this other than noticing the health bar is taking longer to go down, which doesn't exactly have the same spectacle factor as having multicolored bars. The final boss of the game should be able to stand out from the first boss in terms of gameplay, which here he does not really. But now we can talk about the heat colors for the bosses, which again is only a problem unique to Yakuza 6. So this is something that makes me believe the game really was rushed or had some kind of identity crisis, or that RGG just got lazy, because there is no excuse for every boss having the exact same generic red heat aura around them. So this game uses particle effects for the heat, Kiryu's being blue and every boss is being red when they glow. Yakuza fans should know though that red heat doesn't just signify a bad guy, right? In fact, Kiryu used to have red heat as a display of power when you upgraded it enough in Yakuza 3 and 4, that's why his dragon style uses red. This game just said, fuck it, make everyone red cause red equals bad and they're the person you're fighting right now. Right? It just takes so much charm away from the game, you have no idea. The entire concept of heat and heat auras is unique to Yakuza, right? It's Yakuza's thing. Heat moves are the bread and butter of the combat, which is the main gameplay mechanic that the entire game revolves around. So it's not exactly a small thing. That's why bosses in every other game have a unique heat aura that represents either their power or personality or whatever. Do you understand? So when you remove all and any individuality from bosses in every aspect of the gameplay, it makes every fight that much more forgettable and unenjoyable. The final boss is the only fight where there is a slight distinction, and I mean slight. Uwami, who we will speak more about later, has a little bit of white mixed into his red, which is so subtle that they might as well not even have bothered. I remember thinking it should have been red, white, and blue, not because Iwami is patriotic or anything, but because they could have at least used all three heat color assets to make it somewhat more unique, but whatever. While we're on this train of thought, by far the worst fight in the entire game, in my opinion, is Akiyama's. We'll discuss the narrative reasons why this fight even happens in a separate part, but for now I'd like you to keep in mind that Akiyama is a former playable main character, and they couldn't bother giving him any form of special treatment. Even his dynamic intro is an in-game one, and has always looked stupid. He has the health bar, of course, which is fine because protagonists usually do have one bar, but then he also has the same generic red heat, which is so goddamn dumb. Like, at least reuse Kiryu's blue aura, man. Akiyama glowing red because he is the current boss just screams tone deafness when they were designing this game. And remember how we were talking about Kiryu's fighting style getting reworked? Akiyama also sports a changed style where he uses his fists? Why? Like, I get that it's a more realistic form of Taekwondo, but why even bother when Akiyama's entire thing is that he exclusively uses his legs during combat? This pissed me off back then when I saw it for the first time because it's such a small, unnecessary change to make. And this isn't even a real fight. Akiyama puts his hands up half the time to beg Kiryu to stop caving his face in for no reason, and then he gets his ass kicked. So not only is it just a bad fight in this cramped nursery room, but it is genuinely disrespectful to Akiyama's character. They try to save some face for him by having him say he wasn't even trying, which is like, duh, he doesn't even fight back 50% of the time, so why even bother? I'm saving the narrative for its own part, but I need to say this now that Dante reveals to Kiryu that this fight was completely unnecessary the next time you see him, which is basically right after you leave Akiyama with Haruto. Anyway, let's focus on some more frustrating aspects of the combat. I've covered the block bouncing, the lack of diverse options, unimpactful heat moves, shitty bosses, pretty much most of it. But there are still a couple of things. The stagger is also atrocious. You can get stun locked because of it during specific bosses and in large groups. There were a few sections during my replay here where I was getting legitimately pissed off because you just can't do anything when this happens. You'd better hope you're in extreme heat to prevent death and heal ASAP. There's also a healing problem in this game that most of you are probably aware of. Firstly, the inventory system has been reworked where you're limited to a specific amount of items, but you can buy pretty much anything. Heals are extremely expensive though. Stamina royales are 50,000 yen a pop, so you're better off stocking up on sushi and shit. And then there's the pausing issue where Kiryu dynamically goes on his phone when you pause and attempt to access your inventory to heal. While you're getting your shit beat in though, it's very common to have an input delay for this due to the stagger, or even if you're just lying on the ground. This has definitely gotten me killed more than once, and it doesn't help that Kiryu takes so much damage in this game when you're getting wailed on. You can go from full health to dead in seconds. But that's not even the worst of it. By far, the absolute fucking worst thing in Yakuza 6's combat is instantaneous command grabbing by bosses. What I mean by this is that most bosses have a grab that does instant, unavoidable damage if you're caught by it. There's almost no time to even react or dodge it. You cannot mash X to escape from these instant grabs. You just have to take it and hope you have enough health to not die. By far the worst offenders for this are the clan creator bosses. The wrestlers can legitimately take half your health with their command grab attacks, and it is so frustrating. This clan creator mode just sucks, by the way. It's not their only time attempting to do it, but this one has to be the worst by far. The only fun thing about it is that you can put in codes for free to unlock other Yakuza characters that you'd actually care about. One of Daigo's codes is Kiryu please save me, which is actually funny as fuck. At least it is completely optional, and you can tear through the main missions if you so desire, which nets you a nice little chunk of XP points. So now let's talk about the upgrading system, since it revolves around fighting mostly. It's uninspired, it's lazy, and it's trash. You have to collect 5 different types of XP points to unlock your skills and boost your stats manually, which isn't very fun, and a lot of these skills are legitimately worthless too. There are so many. The XP gain isn't balanced between the 5 categories either, so you are bound to have too much of a specific XP and too little of another. For example, I had so much of the orange XP, which I think is called Heart, and yet I always needed the green XP, which is called Charm or Charisma or some shit, because everything worth getting required that green XP in this game. A compliment that I will extend, though, is at least everything in the game rewards you with some amount of XP points. Minigames, eating, and fighting all give you a little something. The best way to boost your stats is to grind the Rizap Gym minigame, which I actually do like, and wish they would bring back. I completely maxed out with Rizap when I played the demo 6 years ago. Eating at restaurants is also a viable option worth your time now, since you can pick and choose what XP to gain depending on your food selection. Knowing that, you should always seek out a restaurant whenever you take damage or when your hunger meter is just low to gain that useful XP, which does blend great with the new XP system, so at least there's that. Also, the completion list now revolves around this XP system, which makes it more rewarding to go out of your way to do some of the requirements for a couple freebies. I mean, I could go with or without it though, since the completion list is mostly for trophies. I've never gotten 100% on it either, and that's because this was the first Yakuza game ever to not require 100% completion for the Platinum Trophy. I don't really know why that is, but I'm grateful for it because I don't think I'll ever be invested enough to 100% this game, especially since all the extra XP you've accrued becomes worthless after you unlock all the good skills and stat upgrades. Overall, I wouldn't say that Yakuza 6's combat is the absolute worst. It is slightly more competent than Yakuza 3 in my opinion, though probably just as enjoyable. The new QTE design looks nice, and the new effects also look nice, but having to fight for extended periods just feels like a slogfest. At least Yakuza 6 walked so that future installments could run, right? So this might be petty on my part to dedicate a whole section to talk about this, but this has to be the least funny Yakuza game available. The sub-story humor was very off for me, especially if you take into account all the other issues with the game. I mean, the wild and wacky comedy of Yakuza layered on top of a serious dramatic story is supposed to have you left with the game, not at it. The exception of this, of course, are the Hirose family scenes with the guys. Those are genuinely comedic. In fact, those are probably the only funny characters in the entire game, and for a long time I didn't know why they were so exceptional until the knowledge was bestowed upon me that they are all just famous Japanese comedians and actors. That's the reason why they have actual comedic chemistry. Now, I knew Hirose himself was a famous comedian in Japan, but I have to be honest, I didn't care much for Hirose, at least compared to everyone else who seems to love him. He doesn't do much of anything until the reveal. I don't think he added an extra layer of comedy to the game either. Like, did he even tell a single joke? Anyway, this game somewhat has a problem with celebrity overload. Not to act like it's new for Yakuza to have celebrity cameos or popular actors play major roles in their games. I mean, look at Yagami from Judgment, for God's sake. But centralizing the entire plot around these actors at the expense of other long-standing Yakuza characters is kind of fucked up. Which sucks harder because these are just the best characters in the game, and Yakuza 6 knows it. Another big example of Japanese celebrities are the clan creator wrestlers I previously mentioned. All these guys are popular wrestlers in Japan who wanted to be in Yakuza, which is why this mode even exists basically. Each of them has a specific quirk or joke that they repeat ad nauseum, and I'm gonna be honest, it never once made me laugh or even cross a smirk. They're just not funny. Call me a cynical asshole, but humor is subjective, and I don't think Yakuza 6 lands any of it for me outside of the Hirose family. I mean, a lot of these sub-stories are just straight up garbage too. The body switching fake out was dumb, not funny, the time traveler girl is dumb, and the literal ghosts are fucking dumb. Yakuza isn't the most grounded franchise out there, but they at least have always stayed outside the realm of the supernatural. Every time they play around with the idea of spirits or ghosts, they offer a rational explanation for it, but then sometimes give one more Scooby-Doo-esque possibility that it might all be true. Which is a proper punchline, right? But to straight up have Kiryu fight ghosts because he is fucking awesome dragon that beat up fucking ghost awesomely is dumb writing. In my opinion, these have to be the worst written sub-stories in this series as well. While we're on the same track, let's discuss a couple of sub-story minigames, shall we? So Rise Up is actually good, like I've said before, but there's also the Cat Cafe content that I almost forgot to activate over halfway into my playthrough. And this one is also alright, you just feed kitties the corresponding cat food that they like so that you can collect them and visit them in the cafe. It's purely extra side content, so I can't be mad about it. But the big one for Yakuza 6 is the inclusion of live chat rooms where you watch Kiryu type in the most boomer way possible while a Japanese porn star strips for you. So we can add this to another point for Japanese celebrities, I guess. Because these are straight up porn stars. Like, there's not even a big point I need to make about it either, it's just blatantly here for people to jerk off to some softcore strip pornography. It's not like Yakuza has ever been prude to sexual themes though. Does anyone remember Mesu King? But I think this has to be the most obvious case of them pushing for some kind of sexual flavor to the game. I mean, it is kind of funny to laugh at the first time you do it, but then there's no reason to ever come back here unless you are actually just horny. In Hiroshima, there are a few unique minigames as well. The aforementioned baseball minigame that plays out way too automatically. I feel like the player should have much more control over what's happening rather than getting the chance to hit the ball for yourself once in a while, which is weirdly inconsistent in itself. There's the spear fishing minigame, which you have to activate by finding fish on the dock that are borderline hidden, which allows you to unlock an on-rail shooter for spearing fish. I mean, this one isn't a bad minigame either, it's pretty fun, just kinda silly how Kiryu scuba dives with no gear on for breathing, and that they actually spent dynamic intro budget on the blood shark. Then there's the bar stuff where you talk, drink, and make friends, which has to be the least fleshed out minigame they've ever done, despite the fact that it's actually a decent idea. Too bad Kiryu will never see any of these people again though, so it makes it hard for you to care about them that much, and again, a lot of their stories aren't that funny. Moving on to the influence itself this game has had on Yakuza's style of humor, it was detrimental. There must be different writers now since Yakuza 0 and Kiwami, because those games actually had proper jokes mixed into the randomness presented to the player. Whereas Yakuza 6 went into the direction of random equals funny, and we don't need to add any extra layer of irony to it because it's so quirky and hilarious all on its own. The biggest example I can think of is Ono Michio, the mascot. Now, let me preface that this entire bit with Ono Michio was fine when it was just in Yakuza 6. It wasn't the funniest thing ever, and they didn't do much with it outside of the obvious gags, but it was fine. But now every single game has to include some kind of reference to Ono Michio, entire sub-stories are dedicated to him, he shows up in Kamurocho even though he is a fucking mascot for Hiroshima City. It doesn't make sense to me why they push this gag so hard, because there's almost never a joke associated with Ono Michio other than the fact that he exists and he is there. The joke is literally, hey look, it's Ono Michio, how hilarious is that? And we're supposed to holler and laugh and clap in an uproar of applause because this is obviously the funniest shit ever, right? I can't put all the blame on 6 for inspiring shit like this though, but it did set the precedent for what was funny in the Dragon Engine games, which is why the humor noticeably fell off after 0. This influence also infected the fan base as well. Upon Yakuza 6's release, I swear that all of my least favorite Kiryu jokes started to spawn into existence. Of course, there's always been inside jokes for Yakuza fans to spread, but with Yakuza 6, most of these jokes became overdone and completely unfunny. I'll give a few examples right now. Exhibit A, Dame Dame Guy. Now this joke has been floating around since before Yakuza 0, so it wasn't new or anything. But with 6's release, it became so mainstream to the point that unfunny-ass kids genuinely didn't know what Kiryu's name was and were calling him Dame Dame Guy. This is especially stupid when you realize that Yakuza 6 doesn't even have Bakamitai available at karaoke bars. Exhibit B, Kiryu is a virgin. Now this one was absolutely popularized by this game. The topic of Kiryu's virginity has been debated for a long time, as the games and RGG have purposely left it vague for you to interpret. I personally think Kiryu must have gotten some action back in his 20s, or at least by Sayama one time before she left. The big spark for this joke though was the dialogue choice during the first Onomichio substory. So many people have taken this at face value as Kiryu confessing his virginity despite the fact that he is literally answering as Onomichio. If you read it properly, he is responding to one of the kids' questions about whether the mascot has a girlfriend or not, and Kiryu, feeling awkward from the question, decides to answer that Michio is a pure and honest mascot that has never had sex in all its life. The fact that this is a wildly inappropriate response from a mascot is the joke. The joke isn't that Kiryu Kazuma, the 4th chairman of the Tojo clan, is confessing his virginity for no reason. Yeah, it was a pretty funny bit in this vacuum here, but so many people have beaten this joke to death, and even accepted it as canon at face value. I'm not saying that Kiryu virgin jokes can't be funny, there are still a few bangers that crop up from time to time, but I do think a lot of the memes surrounding it are just flat out unfunny or cringe. Exhibit C. Kiryu has never killed anyone. Now, I can't blame the fanbase for loving this one, because even the games themselves push this narrative that Kiryu has never killed a soul, the joke in that being Kiryu's brutal heat moves would 100% murder people in real life, or that even in some cutscenes he straight up causes the death of people or shoots them himself with a fucking gun. Like, what the hell, how are you gonna say this man hasn't killed somebody? You know what, let's go ahead and count the people that Kiryu kills in cutscenes in just this game alone. Without a shadow of a doubt, murders them. Now, the problem with this example isn't even the joke in itself is bad, it's really not, because most people say it ironically whilst knowing that Kiryu has definitely killed some of these people. The issue I take with it is that there is a minority of people who will genuinely fight you on it tooth and nail. They will argue and do mental gymnastics to explain how Kiryu has never been responsible for a death, despite how directly he may have caused it. That is when the joke stops being a joke and becomes a genuine headache to see fans defend Kiryu's innocence so vehemently when he himself doesn't claim to be a saint. Like, Kiryu isn't Jesus, he is a mafia hero and criminal. It's so weird how characters like Daigo can straight up shoot and kill people without anyone batting an eye. Nobody calls him evil for doing so. Whereas Kiryu has never gotten a free pass to kill someone major, the writers treat him like he's Batman with some kind of no-kill rule. Even in this very game, they set up a whole point that Kiryu wants to kill the main villains, right? He is finally gonna waste some bad guys. And then he just doesn't, and faces the consequences immediately. Something he has had to do in basically every game because he won't just kill these fucking psychotic losers. But now we're starting to delve into the game's story, so let's finally move on to Yakuza 6's narrative. Alright, so this is definitely going to be the longest segment in the video since we're basically going to cover the entire story in one go. Instead of dissecting each and every scene, I like to go through every character individually and then talk about the big moments that pertain to the overall plot. First, I would once again like to point out the sentiment that Yakuza 6 wiped its ass with Yakuza 5. There were so many characters in 5, a huge cast, with many of them needing some kind of closure or at least a quick follow-up. And instead we get absolutely nothing, not even a passing mention of a single Yakuza 5 character, other than the reused cutscene showing Aizawa at the start of the game. Which is a blatant spoiler, by the way, for anyone who skipped 5, so bravo RGG on that one. Even if you don't like 5, which you should, but I'm not going to defend the game in this video, I'll save that for another time, you can't deny how lazy it is to sweep an entire game's events under the rug and just ignore it for the sake of moving on to your new mediocre plot. Anyway, starting with Kiryu, obviously, he is the only playable character in Yakuza 6 as the story mostly revolves around him and Haruka. It's revealed he survived the events of 5 and then goes back to prison to time skip 3 years. I mean, they do explain why this happens, but also Kiryu could have fought the charges, but he simply chooses not to because of insert philosophical bullshit, and allows them to whisk him away from his family. When we do come back, we do get to spend some time with the orphans, which is good. You know, this is basically Kiryu's family at this point. They're all he has, and we spent Yakuza 3 bonding with them, so might as well keep them relevant, right? Well, not really, because when you leave them, we never come back to Okinawa until the very last cutscene. But yeah, Kiryu is Kiryu. He hasn't changed much. It's usually the outside perspective of him that changes, but doesn't make much of a difference. For example, the game hammers the point that Kiryu is an absolute legend by now. His feats and accomplishments have carried his name all across Japan to the point that anyone worth their salt knows who he is. Except the respect and general fear that these organizations should have for him doesn't exist. They still fuck with him, antagonize him, test him, fight him. How is it that the Tojo clan is once again gonna try to take down the dragon because they came up with yet another evil plot? It's such a tired cycle of Kiryu wanting to stay neutral, getting pulled into the gang war, stops the war by beating up the bad guys because he's fucking awesome dragon fucking punch Yakuza down and win, then the game fakes out his death, only to reveal that he didn't actually die, and then roll credits. Kiryu doesn't have any more character development to go through anymore. We can only rehash shit with him that we have already done in previous games, which Yakuza 6 absolutely did. If anything, Kiryu feels slightly nerfed in this game, as he is able to get staggered by Nagamo and wince in pain when Jungi steps on his shoe. He also gets dropped by Iwami via a gut punch at the end, but we'll get there later. Remember when he was able to take a bottle to the head? Since he is tied to every other character's story though, I'll move on from him directly since he will remain relevant when discussing everyone else. Haruka Sawamura, daughter of Yumi and Jingu. This is by far Haruka's worst game. I don't think she makes a single smart decision in the entire story, and her personality has been snuffed out completely. She barely even speaks when she's not comatose, nor makes her thoughts known. Her running off to Hiroshima because a single tabloid was talking smack about her in the orphanage shows a real lack of emotional endurance that Haruka has obtained over the course of the series. This game's portrayal of her character has always rubbed me the wrong way, especially when you consider Yumi's final warning to her as she lies dying. And what is the first thing Haruka does in this game after returning home? She runs away and makes the same mistake as her mom, thus tarnishing Yumi's last words to her. She goes and fucks a country hick, gets pregnant, then gets into a hit-and-run car accident with her baby that puts her into a coma for most of the game, which is the reason why Kiryu does anything and the story even happens. I don't even know what compelled her to have sex with Yuta. Like in the one flashback of them together that they show, it's not exactly romantic. If anything, you would think that Haruka would want to stay away from him after this, but we'll get to Yuta later. The emotional scene between her and Kiryu when she wakes up is pretty good, but it still leaves me feeling dissatisfied as Kiryu and her don't catch up beyond the plot that is currently happening right that instant. Overall, I think this game tried its best to ruin Haruka. I do respect that they took such a bold approach with her to drive a new narrative element home, but replaying the game, I think it could have been so much better and far less generic. Speaking of main characters though, Saejima gets his 5 seconds of screen time where we see him get arrested for the 3rd game in a row. I feel so bad for Saejima because they really ruined his character arc in the same game he was introduced, and ever since then they have not known what the fuck to do with him. They don't resolve any of his plot pieces or connections made in Yakuza 5, of course, which could also be said about his brother Majima. Majima gets treated very similarly, not a word is mentioned about Park, Katsuya, or anything that happened in 5, and then both he and Daigo are arrested off-screen, never to be seen again until the very end of the game. I'm pretty sure not a single person liked this. Everyone can see that this was just a lazy way to write off these characters so that they can't interfere with the rest of the story. It was also just a dumb move by the writers. Yakuza 6's release was coming off of Zero and Kiwami, two games that skyrocketed Majima's popularity to a beloved degree by the fans. So what do they decide to do with him coming back? Oh yeah, let's put him on the back burner with no screen time, that sounds fun. It's also why he has no boss fight in this game, by the way. Daigo gets it slightly better because at least he and Kiryu had a chance to talk at the beginning, and Kiryu writes him a letter at the end. I'm still pissed that 6 decided to group these three together though, and write them off from this point on in the series. We don't get to see Daigo get arrested, and we don't get to see anything on his court trials, we are only told. And storytelling 101 is to show, not tell. I have to give props though to the letter that Kiryu wrote him at the end. They do an actually decent mislead where you think Kiryu is writing it to Haruka, but then reveals it's actually for Daigo and that he sees Daigo as his son, despite how strained their relationship has become. I feel like this does a good job of resolving Daigo's character after 4 games straight of him sucking ass, which is why you can bet that Gaiden's scene with him absolutely pissed me off. Imagine receiving such an emotional letter from your father figure claiming to be dead, only to meet him again and he pretends to not even know who you are due to stupid ass reasons perpetuated by his faked death. God, I hated that fucking scene. Moving on, Akiyama is yet another main character who gets backseated pretty hard. He is nerfed to the point where he has to hide from the Sayo Triad because he's scared of Ed. Kiryu only seeks him out for information but refuses to help him beyond that point. This is probably the most disrespectful depiction of Akiyama, considering he might be my favorite Yakuza character, and especially because this was the last game he's shown up in until Infinite Wealth comes out. I've gone over his boss fight earlier in the video and why it's terrible, but now I can elaborate on the narrative reasons, which might be even worse. So Kiryu hears that CPS, Child Protective Services, wants to take Haruka's child, Haruto, away because he has no caregiver with her comatose. Even though Kiryu tells the guy he is Haruka's guardian and that he runs an orphanage, the CPS agent still refuses to give him custody due to the dumbest, fakest ass reasons that no real professional would ever say to somebody. So in a panic, Kiryu decides to kidnap Haruto, which even if you're considering Kiryu's angry and confused state of mind, is the worst plan ever because the police would immediately know he did it and where he is, resulting in Haruto being taken away regardless. I get that Kiryu isn't the smartest himbo out there, but this was especially stupid for him considering his reasoning is that he doesn't want Haruto to go to a different orphanage because orphanages are bad, despite the fact that he could legally fight for Haruto to transfer to his orphanage, and that it would be temporary either way until Haruka woke up. Akiyama, being a reasonable and rational human being, tells Kiryu this is a bad idea, which results in Kiryu instigating the boss fight with him. So we, as the player, have to play as the guy in the wrong and beat up the good guy in the right, so that we can still a baby, of course. So here's the thing with all this. It could have actually set up a great dramatic plot piece with Haruto. Kiryu, being in an irrational state of mind, goes on the run with Haruka's baby, and he can't even rely on his friends anymore because they know how grave of a mistake he's making. If Yakuza 6 was a good game with a good story, that's the direction it would have gone in, especially since that's what it was building towards, right? So what happens instead? Well, Akiyama laughs it off and basically sucks Kiryu's dick to validate his awful decision. Then Kiryu runs into Date, who tells Kiryu the matter's over with and he can keep Haruto anyway, because the CPS guy doesn't even frickin' care anymore about baby because Kiryu's so frickin' legendary and awesome he can frickin' kidnap baby and fucking get away with it. It's fucking stupid, that whole part. And after that, Akiyama is kinda off chilling for the rest of the game, until he comes back a couple more times to help out in some long battles, but either way he's still like heavily backseated. He's also smart enough to know Kiryu isn't dead, which should be super important to note, but whatever, he's not even mentioned in Gaiden. Speaking of Date though, this may come as a surprise, but I have nothing but positive things to say about him. This might actually be his best game. You know, he's helpful, resourceful, prevalent with a big role, and actually takes his job seriously in a realistic fashion. And the best part is he has no personal diversion to the story. You don't have to help him or his daughter at all. He just helps Kiryu and Haruto over and over. I don't know why he lets his dumbass annoying partner yap so much though. He should have told that guy to shut up and show some damn respect, but it's not his fault that that dude sucks. I do wonder what happened to Suda though. We haven't seen that guy since Yakuza 4. But yeah, thumbs up to Detective Date here for being a good character again in this game. Since we've been talking about Haruto though, I might as well go over the little guy. I mean, he's a baby. There's not much to say in terms of his complexity or anything. He serves as this story's MacGuffin, which the plot revolves around. I don't know why Kiryu doesn't just call him his grandson when people ask. Considering his father-daughter relationship with Haruka, he might as well not bother correcting to the contrary. Now, there's a running joke in the community that Kiryu might be on the spectrum, since it would explain a lot about how he acts and his personality. The biggest piece of evidence supporting this, though, has to be Kiryu buying convenience store food for Haruto instead of any baby food or milk. He actually needed to be told by Date that this is not a good idea. Like, come on, Kiryu, you run an orphanage. There's no way you can be this clueless and incompetent when it comes to babies. Anyway, he takes Haruto to Hiroshima with him to find his dad, which puts the baby in harm's way, don't you think? Kiryu doesn't know anybody here, he instantly starts beef with the local Yakuza, and even forgets to pack extra milk to feed him. During this part, you have to walk around with Haruto, and this is the only time in the game where you have to do a little minigame to calm him down, and it activates like 4 times in a row too. And then it's never seen again. At least I never saw it again. Which is so weird. I think Haruto was originally planned to have an even bigger role with Kiryu. Maybe you would have had the choice to take him with you during certain times. I mean, who knows. Now we're on to Hiroshima, folks, but I can't be asked to go through each minor supporting character, so we'll mainly focus on the big names. First, we meet Kiyomi, the bar mama who helps Kiryu get a place to stay and is an overall great gal. She plays into a good dynamic where Nagamo has an open crush on her, but she doesn't indulge him. It's not clear if she actually had a thing for Kiryu or only liked him because of Haruto, but either way I think she's a pretty good character even despite her lying about actually knowing Haruka to protect her. It's funny how many people in Michio come to trust Kiryu so quickly, but still wouldn't divulge the main piece of information he came here for. But anyway, we find out about her past with Somea, which adds an extra layer of complexity to her, which is why it's unfortunate she starts to play a much smaller role halfway through the game, as the focus starts to shift on him. Now don't get me wrong, I think Somea is a great character. He might be the only good villain in the game, so I'm excited to talk about him later. But first, let's go over the Hirose family. Now we have the boys, the fam. Matsunaga and Takashira play a much smaller role compared to Nagamo and Yuta, but I still want to give them their honorable mention as they do still add to the group dynamic and are likable in their own right. Nagamo, on the other hand, the captain of the family, is by far the most prevalent character in the game besides Kiryu. Undoubtedly the fan favorite of the group, he starts his relationship with Kiryu antagonistically, causing petty fights with him with the most endearing soundtrack in the game played over it. You fight Nagamo 1, 2, 3, 4 times in the game, with the 4th time being completely unnecessary as this is well after you gained his respect, but he switches up on you due to his loyalty to Hirose or whatever. Doesn't matter, he changes his mind again right after the fight. Now it breaks my heart to expose this because while I have said Nagamo is a lovable character and his dynamic with the others is probably the best part of the game, this entire bit with the Hirose family is a giant reskin of the Nakahara family from Yakuza 3. Nagamo is the reincarnation of Rikia, and that's why you like him. The fighting him until you earn his respect, the emphasis on wanting to call Kiryu their Anaki, taking their bumpkin Yakuza ass to Kamurocho where they have to blend into Tokyo life. Even Hirose looks similar to Nakahara. None of it is original, even if it was arguably done better here in 6. Kiryu himself says he likes these guys but doesn't give a reason. It's a little out of character for him to warm up to people this easily. If it was intentionally supposed to parallel the Nakahara family, they could have at least had Kiryu reference the similarities between them, but whatever. Even when he knows the group is lying to him about Haruka, he decides to wait patiently for Nagamo to tell him on his own accord. Well, Kiryu, that's much better treatment you're giving to these hicks you just met over Akiyama, whom you have known for years by now. Overall, Nagamo is a pretty funny guy and I like him. Hopefully he's in infinite wealth at all so that we can follow up on what happened to him and Kiyomi. Now, Yuta arguably plays the biggest role in the group for the fact that he's revealed to be Haruto's father. Up until that point, he's kind of like a sidekick to Kiryu and Nagamo, but he never admits to his relationship with Haruka until Hirose calls him out in front of the whole squad. I think it is beyond moronic that he failed to mention having sex with her, knowing that he didn't use protection and that Kiryu is here looking for Haruto's father. It should have been more than obvious to him that it was possible to be said father. He explains that the reason for his silence is that everyone was saying that a guy named Tatsukawa, a former member of the Hirose family, was the father. Like bro, that was just a guess thrown out by Kiyomi because no one else had any idea who she randomly fucked while she was here, and you are so stupid you thought that she did you and then also went and did your friend. You really think she's that slutty? But the even bigger plot twist about Yuta is that he and Tatsukawa are secretly Chinese immigrants with connections to the Sayao Triad who were smuggled into Japan as babies due to the one-child policy. The reason why this was kept from Yuta his whole life is because he is the Triad leader's son and backup heir in case the firstborn son were to die, which he did. This is also why there's so much significance placed on Haruto, as he was born outside of the Triad's blood that they base their hierarchy around, which causes political ramifications to the underworld, and many people see the opportunity to use Haruto against not only the Triad, but also against Kiryu. I'm not gonna lie, this entire part of the plot is pretty well written and interesting. Like, this is actual crime drama shining light on real world issues that happen in this part of the underworld. Even the Triad leader Big Lo is an interesting character. Quickly, before we get to him though, let's summarize. While searching for Tatsukawa, the gang finds out he was killed by Ed, the big guy, and that he was in fact the one who ran Haruka over in a genuine accident when they were disputing over Haruto. But it doesn't matter since he's not the father. Ed himself is the brute of the Triad, Akiyama hypes him up as the reason for his hiding, and the game goes out of its way to display his strength, skill, and psychotic tendencies. But it never goes anywhere, besides a few boss fights. Not that it needed to, but you never get more from this guy in terms of narrative, rather than him being a physical obstacle. It's also revealed that Mazuso, this Yomei Alliance goon we fought, is also part of the Triad, but nobody cares about this guy, and he dies off screen after acting like a coward. Big Lo, on the other hand, starts off as your typical Triad leader character with little personality, think discount Lao Ka Long, but when Yuta finally accepts responsibility as Haruto's father, he gets the dumbass idea to go and kill Lo, his father, and himself, as then the Triad would have no more reason to go after Haruka or Haruto. Except they would, because then he would be directly next in line as the heir to the Triad, but whatever, Kiryu beats him up, and then Big Lo realizes that this obsolete value and outdated emphasis that the Triad puts on their bloodline has not only ruined his family and lost him both his sons, but has now caused the downfall of the entire Triad and his heritage. So he actually accepts that he was wrong the whole time, then helps Kiryu out concerning the secret of Hiroshima, which we will definitely get to later, but as soon as he outlives his purpose, he fucks off and accepts his inevitable death in a sort of cautionary tragic tale about valuing the wrong thing over family. This guy's character arc is super underrated for how well they did it. I feel like if Lo had a boss fight, it would have helped a lot with his memorability. You could just tell he wanted to be Lao Ka Long so bad. But yeah, he is a good character, seriously. You know who is an overrated character? Jungi Han, current leader of the current Jingoan Mafia, which play their most minor role yet in a Yakuza game. Jungi started the trend where every Yakuza game needed to have a crazy, sexy Korean guy in it, and it is because of the fact that Jungi is crazy and sexy that people like him. Besides having a somewhat interesting introduction and revealing that he now owns and redesigned Club Stardust, he doesn't do much besides being a spectacle for the game. Even when he and the Jingoan show up later to kidnap Haruto, they don't make it far or even past the chapter. Kiryu and Ko show up to their boat almost immediately, which is a god-awful section where you have to throw explosive barrels to blow up large crowds of enemies, and try not to fall off the boat for some reason. Kiryu beats up Jungi for a third and final time, then Han gets his head shot open like a watermelon by Hirose. I swear that this cutscene was in-game and not even pre-rendered, but I think I was mixing it up with a certain death in Lost Judgment. Either way, it just goes to show how unimpactful this death is, and when you really stop to think about it, Jungi on the whole contributed absolutely nothing to the overall plot, besides helping find Tatsukawa. Also, we can add another point for rehashing the Jingoan Mafia for no reason, since we could have deleted them from the game entirely and nothing would have changed. Since we skipped over Hirose earlier and we're getting to the secret of Hiroshima plot point anyway, let's finally talk about it. So I've mentioned this previously, but Hirose was highly advertised for this game's release since his actor is a big comedian in Japan. I personally don't care that much for Hirose, but I think he's alright. The fact that he's hiding something possibly nefarious wasn't exactly a big shocker for how he conducts himself. None of the family members want to believe he is capable of hiding the secret of Hiroshima via murder since they respect him as a father figure, But after a fight with him and the big reveal, Hirose explains that he has loyally served Kurusu for decades in keeping the secret. Kurusu being the patriarch of the Yomei Alliance, the third biggest Yakuza family in Japan, which they retconned into this game by the way. He also happens to be the father to Sunio Iwami, the final boss of the game, and tutor to Koshimizu, the Yomei captain he is training to be his successor. More on those two later. For now, we will note that Kurusu had basically groomed Hirose to be subservient to him since he was a child. A very similar father-son relationship we have seen in previous Yakuza games, and that Hirose has with his boys in this very game. Kurusu had made an agreement with a powerful politician named Daidoji to hide his big secret forever and ever, even at the expense of killing his own men, family, and friends, which he then entangles Hirose into despite the fact that Hirose does not and would not know what the secret even is. Nonetheless, Hirose having finally failed him, Kurusu shoots him to death and then walks off knowing he is also bound to die very soon. As the gang surrounds a dying Hirose, he reveals that he killed all their fathers as part of the secret affair and adopted them into his Yakuza family in a very similar parallel to how Kazuma revealed much of the same to Kiryu when he died. This is why Kiryu starts to get so emotional here, but I don't know, I feel like it could have been done much better if Kiryu actually related Hirose to Kazuma or talked about it once in this game. But whatever, I didn't make this shit, right? So, what is the secret of Hiroshima, you ask? Well, in World War II, aforementioned politician Daidoji had gained power and influence, but still held concerns regarding national security. So he embezzled political funds to build a secret battleship, dubbed the Yamato Mark II. This was the most classified military operation in the country due to the illegal nature surrounding its funding. After the war ended, however, the battleship served no purpose other than being huge proof of Daidoji's crime and could blemish his reputation, which risks him losing the massive amount of power he has obtained over the years to become Japan's fixer. The fixer being the guy who basically pulls all the country's political strings behind the scenes. I know, nice rhyme. In an attempt to cover his scandal up, Daidoji commissions Hiroshima's Yomei Alliance, as in Patriarch Kurusu, to hide his secret for him until the day they all die. Now, if you have played Yakuza 6, you already knew all of this for the most part. The reason I want to establish my understanding of the plot twist and memory of all the details is so that we can all move on to my rant about it on the same page. So, with all that being said, this has to be the fucking dumbest, most over-the-top plot twist in the whole series. Every Yakuza game has a big stupid plot twist on some soap opera level of unbelievable bullshit, but this one has to take the cake because not only does it come out of nowhere, it also has no relevance to Kiryu, Haruka, or anything in the overall theme of the game. Yakuza 6 already had a consistent theme going on with family and how our life choices affect them and shape us, and then they start dropping these little hints about a political conspiracy around Iwami's shipbuilding, the fixer, and some esoteric secret. When you reveal the ship, it literally comes floating out of the fucking ocean floor in the most unimmersive, ridiculous fashion ever, and then boom, it's just there for everyone to see. Kiryu had no real reason to expose this secret either. If anything, it was worse doing so as it made him and Haruka a target on Daidoji's radar. Other than shaking the hornet's nest of shitty villains, revealing the secret also changes nothing about the overall story. Doesn't change anything about Haruto or Haruka, it's just there. And the dumbest part about this big-ass ship is the fact that it still physically exists. Apparently Daidoji did request Kurusu to destroy the ship, but Kurusu refused in order to keep it as leverage against him. And instead of just killing Kurusu and having it deconstructed himself, Daidoji just said, "I bet," and let it sit underwater in this impossible space backrooms area, whatever the fuck it is. After so long and so many deaths, why wouldn't Kurusu just destroy it by now? It's the dumbest shit ever. It really is. Anyway, with that discussion out of the way, we can finally go over the rest of the game's dogshit villains and the only good one. So we've established that the Tojo clan is evil again in this game due to a plot perpetuated by Sagai and Someya to get Daigo and the original officers arrested so that they're out of the way. This allows Sagai to become acting chairman and Someya as his right-hand officer. Kiryu meets them for the first time after catching a Tojo spy watching him, and while they try to blow it off as nothing, in reality they know Kiryu being out of jail is bad news for their plot. Evil plot shit. Despite how often Kiryu will say he is not Yakuza or that he has nothing to do with the Tojo clan anymore, he will always come back into the spotlight. Now this scene, among others, demonstrates how much the modern Yakuza is changing, with the throne room being replaced by a standard executive table, or Someya later explaining that they don't need tattoos or oaths anymore. It really puts the player into Kiryu's perspective that he's becoming obsolete. Things are changing and the golden days of organized crime have long since ended. Which is something I wish this game focused on more instead of other stupid shit, but that's fine I guess. Now, Someya starts off as your standard Yakuza 6 character. He is disrespectful to Kiryu while feigning professionalism. He acts cocky without earning it. He is plotting evil shit with all the other evil plotters, etc. But over time, the story starts to flesh him out a lot more than any other villain, and actually adds depth and some complexity to him. I know, right? What are those doing in my frickin' Yakuza 6 game? Depth and complexity. We learn that he was previously married to Kiyomi before she left him due to developing some abusive behaviors, and that they secretly have a daughter together which he's been raising alone since Kiyomi ran away. Although he acts possessive over Kiyomi, there's still an air of care between them. We also learn that the main strain in their relationship was his job as a Yakuza, and he has come to hate being one and hating the Yakuza in general, which is why he acts so indignant. He starts to develop a more genuine respect for Kiryu though, as he gets pissed off at these guests who start shit-talking the 4th chairman, much like how Mine gets mad and stabs that guy with a fork in Yakuza 3. Though I don't think this game ever explains what exactly set Someya off here. He also starts to communicate with Kiryu directly, even taking his side sorta by the last chapter. Backing up a bit though, we fight Someya for the first time after he kidnaps Kiyomi once he learns she's in Hiroshima with him. He lets her go, and we learn that Someya's here to make an oath with Koshimizu, the Yomei Alliance captain. Side note, what is up with the mask bit? This game does it twice, and both times everyone ends up ripping them off and exposing their identity anyway, so why do we even bother? Anyway, Kurusu asks Kiryu to witness the oath for reasons that don't matter, because villains only pretend to respect Kiryu when it's convenient for the story to, otherwise they treat his threats and actions like a joke when he has a real track record of following up on them. Kiryu refuses, obviously, which causes the oath to fall through for some reason. I'd also like to point out that Iwami is here, which is important to note because it's the first time Kiryu meets him, but he otherwise plays such a minor role in this scene that I forget he's even in it. We fight Someya a second time when he asks to join Kiryu to meet with Big Lo in an obvious attempt to assassinate him. He fights with us through Shangri-La, the same brothel that Majima drove into, which I'd like to say might be the worst long battle section of the whole game. Not only is it a rehash, as this isn't the first time Kiryu has gone back through a dilapidated Shangri-La, it's just not a fun section to play. You slowly shimmy through the cracks and ledges, fighting random goons and the hangman several times. This guy sucks to fight and his design is just what the fuck. I know people find him funny because again, a random character acting like a horror movie creature is hilarious and quirky, until he kills you with a command grab that sets you back 10 minutes because the checkpoints are scarce in this game for no reason. Who even are these people? Why is Lo making us meet him here? Anyway, the Tojo plot is revealed, Kiryu beats up Someya and Big Lo forgives him because he knows that the Tojo didn't kill his son, Iwami did. He and his son Jimmy Lo actually conducted their own plot with the Tojo clan to gain territory in Kamurocho after burning down Little Asia in a fake war, which turned into a real war after Iwami betrayed the two and had Jimmy killed. Safe to say, Someya loses confidence in his own plot with Sagai after this point and starts helping Kiryu on the low-key. When the big bads figure this out somehow, they kidnap Kiyomi in an attempt to force Someya to kill Kiryu and earn his loyalty back. This leads to his third and final boss fight with an absolutely beautiful soundtrack of violins. This might be the best fight in the entire game. But since Kiryu wins, Someya fails to save her even as he commits seppuku in an attempt to spare her life. Koshimizu turns the camera off as he quote-unquote shoots her, more on that in a minute, and Someya dies in vain, asking Nagamo to take care of his daughter since he knows how loyal he was to Kiyomi and can be trusted. By far the best antagonist in the whole game, he dies barely a villain anymore. I honestly wish Someya was the final boss. It could have been this exact same premise here if they had Iwami stay as a manipulating character only. Someya is leagues better than him anyway in terms of likability and complexity. Next up, let's move on to the other Tojo conspirator, acting chairman Sagai. Yeah, so what can I say about this fucking rat? He sucks, he's lame, he's pathetic. I get that these might be intentional traits, but that doesn't make him any better or more memorable of a villain. First of all, his backstory is retcon that he's been an advisor to the clan even longer than Kiryu has been in it, which changes nothing by the way, so I don't even know why the writers even lie about that. If it's true, he should know firsthand how bad of an idea it is to mess with Kiryu, and yet he still does it anyway. The Tojo clan backs him up for no reason, even though they should absolutely crucify this guy for being the traitor that he is. But overall, he's just a nothing burger. You know, you talk to him maybe a couple of times total, and all he does is act like Iwami's snickering little dog. Think Salacious B. Crumb to Jabba the Hutt, if Iwami was cool enough to be compared to Jabba. He's just a bitter, whiny loser. And now for Koshimizu, since we haven't properly addressed him yet either. Again, another nothing burger of a character. He barely even speaks in the few scenes that he's in throughout the game. The only reason I can even remember his name is because I keep looking it up while writing the script for this video. He has the most generic Yakuza villain design of all time. Nothing about him is original or unique. By far the most forgettable character in the whole game. I doubt most people even remember who he is or that you fight him twice. Once right before Iwami. But he has a plot twist all of his own. Remember how he's the one who shoots Kiyomi? Well, it turns out he actually fired a blank when he turned the camera off, disobeying the order to kill her. There is no explanation as to why he would do this. The characters have to spitball random speculations for lack of a proper reason. If he didn't want to kill her, why didn't he say anything to Kiryu? In fact, where did Kiyomi go after everyone left the Millennium Tower? And after the ending, they imply he's still going to become the new Yomei Alliance chairman. Like, why? Why wasn't he arrested alongside Iwami, especially since he's the one who killed Kurusu after Iwami made a deal with Daidoji following the secret of Hiroshima getting out? This is blatantly bad writing for the sake of a happier ending here. There's no excuse you can give for this shit. But now, we have only one character left to cover, the little baby himself. Suneo Iwami, CEO of Iwami Shipbuilding. Really? We couldn't even give him a cooler subtitle than that? What about the successor to the Kurusu name, or Yomei Alliance or some shit? Now, I haven't exactly made my feelings towards Iwami subtle throughout this video. I think he has got to be the worst final boss in the entire series, and that's if we're being lenient to Yakuza 4. There isn't a single thing about Iwami that is original, unique, or interesting. If he was intentionally designed to look and act like the most generic, evil CEO man, then they nailed it. By far the most bland final boss, the fight itself with him isn't much better. 1 health bar, 1 QTE, too quick, too easy, all trash. The OST for his theme song, The Way of Life, is good of course. Yakuza's music composers never miss with a banger soundtrack. I also used to at least like his dynamic intro, but over time I kind of started to feel like it's goofy looking. Like they were trying too hard to get this cool pose with Kiryu showing off his tattoo, that they sacrifice what makes a dynamic intro, well, dynamic. The characters are supposed to clash in context to the scene, and then the game chooses a cool freeze frame to stop and showcase the name of your opponent. Here with Iwami, they have to make literal cuts because it's not physically possible for Kiryu and Iwami to hit this pose by jumping off the ground, and it just looks sillier every time I see it. Anyway, when it comes to his writing, there is nothing of substance here. Iwami is bad because he's evil and he decides to betray his father after the Daidoji thing. He explains he feels like his dad doesn't see his potential as a Yakuza and that he resents his dad for only giving him a perfect civilian life and not an awesome criminal life. He then orders Koshimizu to kill him, which he does, so if there was ever a point that he should have used blanks, it should have been here, you fucking idiot. But Iwami also reveals the only cool thing about his entire character is that he got a new tattoo. The credit for it looking cool doesn't go to him though, and the significance of him having one comes from Someya explaining how modern Yakuza don't need to get tattoos anymore. But look, Iwami still went out of his way to get one. How legendary is that? To summarize Iwami's motivations further though, he wants to rule Japan's underworld because, yes, and following Daidoji's orders, he has Haruka kidnapped from Date once again. That way Kiryu can't fight back while he tries to kill him. Instead of shooting or stabbing Kiryu, he and Sagai decide to beat him to death, where they reveal that Iwami is secretly a badass with freaky strength. This is just a lazy way to validate a weak character's position as a final boss. Think Kido from Yakuza 4. Kiryu and Nagamo came here with the intention to kill Sagai and Iwami, even if it meant that they also died. Oddly, the game skips over a long battle scene with all these guys, which I'm equally parts grateful for since we don't have to play it, and equally disappointed that there was no hype final beatdown leading up to the final bosses. Iwami and Sagai are attending to Kurusu's funeral, and we're expecting Kiryu to show up, forcing him to stand there and take their hard blows. Thankfully, the other members of the Hirose family come in clutch to save Haruka, which allows Kiryu to beat him up, and would you fucking believe it, nobody kills Iwami or Sagai. This allows Sagai to grab a gun that's lying on the floor, which has to be the worst Yakuza trope ever, where the heroes kick the gun away from the villains where they can just grab it again and shoot more people. Kiryu steals the self-sacrifice spotlight from Yuta and takes all the shots from Sagai, leading to his quote-unquote death. Iwami gets arrested off-screen to hopefully never be mentioned again. Now, I want to discuss further about the consensus surrounding Iwami. Many people say he's actually a decent villain because you hate him so much that you just want to beat him up. And honestly, this just sounds like cope to me. Kiryu has no respect for Iwami, which people say not every villain has to be redeemable or even likable, to which I agree. The fact is, though, that I don't hate Iwami because he genuinely pisses me off within the context of the story. Like, what does he even do again? He kills his own dad, sure, but Kurusu is legitimately an evil piece of shit, so no one should feel bad for him. And he does the one thing any Yakuza villain can do to blackmail Kiryu, kidnap Haruka, and threaten his orphanage. Not exactly a new concept. I even laughed when he came off screen and hit Kiyomi for no reason, because that is just how badly written he is. That seeing him do shit like that for no reason is almost comical because they're trying so hard to make you hate him. None of these scenes make me go, what the fuck, that's so messed up, and I start, growling and my blood pressure starts boiling. No, I don't hate Iwami because he's evil. I hate him because he's fucking boring. I don't care about him. He is nothing to me. He doesn't have a lot of screen time to begin with. The game doesn't develop him for the majority of the story and only focuses on him in the last chapter. There isn't anything memorable about him in the slightest. He's the only Yakuza final boss whose name I consistently forget, and he sucks ass because he had so much more potential to be way better, and instead he will forever be mediocre and forgettable. He's not even a fun character to hate on like people claim. Jingu is a purely evil villain that's fun to hate on, for example, but Iwami is too boring to enjoy making fun of. Even RGG hasn't referenced him that much since this game was released. Almost like they know he's a garbage character. So, there you have it. Iwami, leave the cool tattoo you don't deserve behind, and let the door hit your ass on the way out. Absolute loser. But now we can finally move on to the game's ending, which will also conclude this segment of the video. Which I need. Holy shit, this is the longest script I have ever written. So, Nagamo has Someya's daughter, but since Kiyomi's alive, it kinda nullifies his promise to take care of her unless Kiyomi and him hook up. Everyone else is happy. Haruka returns to Sunflower Orphanage now that she has a bastard child and ex-Yakuza boyfriend. The press will surely leave her alone this time, right? Also, Kiryu didn't actually die, can you believe it? He cuts a deal with Daidoji 2.0 here where he'll fake his death, and I've got to say, after seeing this scene 3 times now since it's shown in Gaiden as well, it feels like such an awkward and weird scene. This guy offers Kiryu hush money to no longer discuss the secret of Hiroshima again. Kiryu refuses the money to instead make specific demands, and the politician immediately loses his shit for no reason, throwing the cold, calculating demeanor right out the window in exchange for a generic scene of some dude bitching at Kiryu and whining. They don't show his face because it's so mysterious, and all the while Date is standing right outside the room allowing this to happen for some reason, and he only intervenes when Kiryu proposes to fake his death to guard the secret, even though the politician wasn't even asking for that much, but yada yada reasons. Blah blah blah, Kiryu goes to Gaiden, which discredits this whole deal. Nobody even believes that Kiryu actually died here. I forgot that Date was the only person who knew for certain that Kiryu was still alive, so why isn't he with hot water with the Daidoji? Why is he not even mentioned in Gaiden either, alongside Akiyama? I mean, whatever, they'll both be an 8, it's been confirmed. The best part of this whole ending, though, is of course the emotional scene of Kiryu walking away from his life, paralleling baby Haruto's first steps into his. A beautiful and poetic finale for the dragon, which no longer holds any weight because Kiryu has appeared in every Like a Dragon game since this one came out. So, if you haven't garnered this yet, I'm not the biggest fan of Yakuza 6's story. I think it sucks. But it was a good stepping stone for future Dragon Engine games to improve upon this new, grounded writing formula that they would use from this point on. I am thankful that Kiryu's story didn't end here though. What a tragic end to his legacy that would have been. Speaking of Kiryu's legacy, so we've come full circle with me mentioning how this was supposed to be Kiryu's last game, yet clearly wasn't. They set up this entire plot to write Kiryu out of the series, only to use it to bring him right back in. I felt like Kiryu's cameos served their purpose in 8, though it seemed a little too easy for them to do. You know, Kiryu immediately warms up to Ichiban almost as a big show of approval for the new protagonist to take over. And then we just got Gaiden last year with a story that I was not super impressed by until the ending. I made a separate video about that game, but my point is that these emotional moments are all that Kiryu has left as he nears the end of his life. These are the moments that make him feel believable, that make his story feel real. Otherwise, what does Kiryu do for the most part now that every personal arc he could have had has been done multiple times? He stands around, scowls, and tells the bad guy he'll end their war. I think if Yakuza 6 has shown anything about Kiryu's legacy, it's that it needs to end. We all love Kiryu, right? But there is such a thing as hitting the end of the road, using a character to their maximum limit, and consequently milking said character if you keep using them over and over. Kiryu's personality has always been very stoic, internal, and quiet. There's not a whole lot of versatility you can do with him unless you're willing to go all out, as Gaiden did with their ending. Yakuza 6 definitely had its fair share of emotional moments, but it wasn't enough to feel like a justified ending to Kiryu's story. Exactly how many times are we gonna fake out his death? How long are we gonna play with the idea of him dying until people stop caring? However, I think enough time has passed, and it's become clear we need to take another proper shot at it. But it has to take itself seriously. It needs to be emotional, and Kiryu has to stop showing up in future titles if the series really wants to move on from him. I don't think Sega will let their iconic cash cow go though, but I'm hoping to be proven wrong. All this being relevant to Yakuza 6, by the way, since it shined the light to most people about how Kiryu's run has inevitably reached its end, or the fact that it at least should. Kiryu is a great character. I will always love the guy, but honestly he's never been the smartest, never been the best written. You know, he's been the strongest. He's the face and soul of Yakuza, but this game fumbled his ending, so now we have to try again. Of course, I'm referring to the upcoming Infinite Wealth again. As of this recording, we are less than a week away from release. I basically dedicate this video to Infinite Wealth as I'm making it in anticipation of playing that game thoroughly. They are once again advertising a definitive end to Kiryu's story, at least through the implication shown in the trailer, and I hope it really happens so that Kiryu can get his rest. You know, we've definitely come a long way since Yakuza 6 was released. Gaiden did do some work in repairing some of the cracks that this game made, but all my expectations are on Infinite Wealth now to capitalize on the improvements that we have made since 6 and bring the story home once and for all. That being said, I'd like to take a little time here to show some appreciation for Yakuza 6's soundtrack. You know, I've made a couple of references to the OST throughout the video, but I really want to make it known that this game's OST is just amazing. I do come back to listen to it from time to time. It makes me remember this game a little bit more fondly. You know, Brother, Brother, Destiny, The Way of Life, all iconic tracks that came from this game. Yakuza's music plays a very important role in this series. It can make or break a scene, a whole boss fight, or even a whole character in some cases. I'll always appreciate how much joy and hype I've gotten over the years from these tracks, and it goes without mentioning that also includes karaoke songs. Yakuza 6 introduced some of the best new songs available. Today is a Diamond, obviously, Hands, and Like a Butterfly. All bangers. So yeah, shout out to the composers and to Kuroda for lending his amazing singing voice to Kiryu for so many years. In conclusion, Yakuza 6 plays an important role in the series. I would never say it's skippable or anything. You know, I said it at the beginning of the video, just because I think it's the worst one in the mainline continuity doesn't by default make it an awful game or anything. There's a lot about it I still appreciate even after typing and reading all this shit. The ending of Gaiden wouldn't be nearly as emotional unless you've played this game. And as for Kiryu, you know, I've grown to understand him over time. How tired he must feel, how sick of all this shit he must be. I'm hoping and praying that Infinite Wealth delivers on fans' expectations and gives Kiryu the proper ending that Yakuza 6 wished it could. If not, expect another video with hopefully not as many words typed out. But if Kiryu really does die, then at least he'll die having achieved more than any other fictional character could hope for. Fame, popularity, and genuine love from the fanbase. A fanbase that Yakuza and Kiryu have brought endless joy to through these silly games, aka serious crime dramas. Kiryu will always be remembered by everyone he spread this happiness and entertainment to, even if he never asked to be. But that's just his song of life. Or way of life. You know, I never understood why the game's title is Song of Life, but the song is called Way of Life. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Is it supposed to be artistic? Like, did they switch them because they thought it sounded more profound that way, or did they even mistranslate it? Man, who gives a fuck?